This video is on domain and range. We're going to be doing examples of domains and ranges from graphs. So some important notes about domains and ranges from continuous graphs. Please note a continuous graph will have no gaps in between them. So you can go from one end of the graph from the farthest left to the farthest right, or from the bottom point to the top point without having to pick up your pencil. Domain and range with continuous graphs is generally a little bit easier than it is with discontinuous graphs. So I'm going to be talking about domain and range. I'm going to be using blue to represent my domain, and I'll be using pink to represent my range. So remember that domain refers to the x values that are represented in a problem, and range refers to the y values that are represented in a problem. Sometimes it isn't possible to list all the values that x or y can be because the graph is continuous and made up of an infinite number of points, like a line, a ray, or even a segment. So if I know that my line is going to continue to going to the left, I cannot list every single number, so that would include the 0, -1, -2, -3, but every number in between those as well. So it is difficult to list every possible value of the domain or range. So we use other ways of writing domain and range. So in a continuous graph, to determine the domain, you should focus on looking left to right of the graph because it's the x values. And you always go for domain and range, you always go from the smallest value to the largest value. So that's why we go from left to right, because the left has the negative values, and as you go towards the right, you go towards the positive values. Also in a continuous graph, to determine the range, you should focus on looking from bottom to top of the graph. Because again, the bottom is your smaller values of the graph, and the top is the higher values. And range are the y values. Y's go up and down in value, or up and down on the graph. Now, we will be using interval notation to help us describe the domain and range for graphs that represent continuous situations. We will also be looking at set notation and see how they can go back and forth between each other. So we're going to look at this information so we can describe the domain and range for 3 different types of continuous graphs. We're going to be focusing on a continuous graph with 2 endpoints, a continuous graph with 1 endpoint, only 1 endpoint, so it continues forever in another direction. And we're also going to be looking at a continuous graph that has 2 arrows, so no end points, and it keeps going on forever in potentially one direction or 2 different directions.